And welcome to Close Reading Classic Literature with me, Dr. Octavia Cox. Today I'm going to analyse Jane Austen's wonderful novel, the first novel she published indeed, Sense and Sensibility, and in particular I'm going to focus on the character of Lucy Steele. The sharp and steely Lucy Steele is of course secretly engaged to Edward Ferrars, who Elinor Dashwood is in love with. And he is in love with Elinor too. Lucy Steele, however, is determined to ward Elinor off Edward to ensure that she keeps him all for herself. And she does this by revealing their engagement to Elinor. Essentially, she says to her, "Keep your hands off, that man is mine." But the key question of this video: did Lucy Steele know about Elinor Dashwood before she came to Barton? Was Lucy Steele aware of Elinor Dashwood as a potential rival for Edward Ferrars' affections before she came to Barton? To understand and unpick this question a little bit more, we're going to dive into the text. So, Lucy Steele and her sister Miss Steele, who is called Anne, but whose nickname is Nancy, which is why those two names appear in the text. Lucy Steele comes to Barton Park at the invitation of Mrs. Jennings and Sir John Middleton. In a morning's excursion to Exeter, they had met with two young ladies, who Mrs. Jennings had the satisfaction of discovering to be her relations. And this was enough for Sir John to invite them directly to the park as soon as their present engagements at Exeter were over. Their engagements at Exeter instantly gave way before such an invitation. Exeter was the principal town, the county town of Devonshire, the county of Devonshire. So it's the social hub, the metropolis, if you like, of Devonshire. The village of Barton, this is where Elinor Dashwood lives, in Barton Cottage, as we learn from chapter 5, is within 4 miles northward of Exeter. So, in other words, the Dashwood women live fairly close to Exeter. When Lucy Steele and Miss Steele arrive at Barton Park, Sir John tries to get the Dashwood women, Elinor and Marianne Dashwood particularly, to come over and visit the new arrivals immediately. So the novel reads, Sir John wanted the whole family, so the 4 Dashwood women, to walk to the park directly and look at his guests. Benevolent, philanthropic man, it was painful to him even to keep a third cousin to himself. "Do come now," said he. "Pray come. You must come. I declare you shall come. You can't think how you will like them. Lucy is monstrous pretty and so good-humoured and agreeable. The children are all hanging about her already, as if she was an old acquaintance, and they both long to see you of all things, for they have heard at Exeter that you are the most beautiful creatures in the world, and I have told them it is all very true, and a great deal more. You will be delighted with them, I am sure. They have brought the whole coach full of playthings for the children. How can you be so cross as not to come? Why, they are your cousins, you know, after a fashion. You are my cousins, and they are my wife, so you must be related." But Sir John could not prevail. So this might just seem like Sir John's good-natured bumbling. But he does reveal, I think, something noteworthy here in amongst the chatter. "They both long to see you of all things, for they have heard at Exeter that you are the most beautiful creatures in the world." So what can we take from this? It's clear, therefore, that Lucy Steele had known of Elinor Dashwood as one of the most beautiful creatures in the world before she had arrived at Barton, for they have heard at Exeter. What's also clear here is that Lucy, had brought up very early in her acquaintance with Mrs. Jennings and Sir John, that she had brought up in conversation the relationship, I suppose, or at least she had brought up Elinor Dashwood and Marianne Dashwood in conversation very early with Mrs. Jennings and Sir John, and Sir John confirms this. So they have heard at Exeter that they are two of the most beautiful creatures in the world. I have told them it is all very true. So the way that this is phrased suggests that Lucy raises the issue and Sir John responds and confirms that it is true. And that's the sort of language that you use when you're responding to what someone else has said. They say something, yes, that's very true. And this, I think, prompts two further questions. First, from whom? From whom had the Steele sisters heard at Exeter? So how had they heard already about the Dashwood women? And second, what had they heard, actually? Had they actually heard that the Dashwood sisters were the most beautiful creatures in the world? Well, long before Lucy Steele appears on the scene at all, or is indeed, the reader is even aware of her at all, we are told of Edward Ferrars's movements around the country. So Edward comes to visit the Dashwood women at Barton Cottage in chapter 16. And the text reads, "After a short silence which succeeded the first surprise and inquiries of meeting, Marianne asked Edward if he came directly from London. No, he had been in Devonshire a fortnight." "A fortnight?" she repeated, surprised at his being so long in the same county with Elinor without seeing her before. He looked rather distressed as he added that he had been staying with some friends near Plymouth. "Have you been lately in Sussex?" said Elinor. "I was at Norland about a month ago." And the moment passes by. The first-time reader will probably put Edward's distressed looks here down to shyness, but the rereader, or the very attentive new reader, will notice this. The rereader will understand why Edward has had to spend 2 weeks in Devonshire at Plymouth. He has been seeing Lucy Steele, and it is this which has made him distressed, or the remembrance of it, perhaps. And this is the first mention of Plymouth, which will prove to be an important place, although we never go there, as we're never taken there by the narrative voice. But it's the first mention of Plymouth in the novel Sense and Sensibility. So Plymouth is a seaside town in Devon, and it's about 45 miles or so away from Exeter. We later learn that near Plymouth is where the Steele sisters sometimes live, sometimes stay with their uncle. So Edward has not come directly from London, we learn. He has come, in fact, directly from seeing Lucy Steele to seeing Elinor. Edward Ferrars, in other words, when this scene is going on, has very, very recently seen Lucy Steele. And presumably, he will have told her and her sister all about Norland. That is the recent family news, after all, that his sister has moved there. And as we can tell from this conversation in chapter 16, he was there only about a fortnight before seeing Lucy near Plymouth. So he says, "I was at Norland about a month ago," and then about a fortnight ago, he went to Plymouth, to near Plymouth. So it makes sense for him to have spoken about Norland, given that his sister has recently moved there and he had been there recently himself. It is made clear to us readers that the Steele sisters know about Norland because Miss Steele brings it up in conversation with Elinor, seemingly to the kind of anxiety and the worry of Lucy Steele. "And how do you like Devonshire, Miss Dashwood? I suppose you were very sorry to leave Sussex?" In some surprise at the familiarity of this question, or at least of the manner in which it was spoken, Ellen replied that she was. "Norland is a prodigious beautiful place, is it not?" added Miss Steele. "We have heard Sir John admire it excessively," said Lucy, who seemed to think some apology necessary for the freedom of her sister. And this is from chapter 21. So this is the same chapter in which we are introduced to Lucy Steele and her sister Miss Steele. So it's all very full on for us readers, as well as for Elinor herself, this familiarity that Elinor feels, the surprise at the familiarity of this question. So only outside of her immediate sphere, so her immediate family, the Dashwoods in other words, only Edward Ferrars, I imagine, would know and understand that Miss Dashwood was indeed very sorry to leave Sussex, and really appreciate and kind of convey the beauty of Norland. Sir John, so that's Lucy's excuse for knowing about Norland and about Sussex, does not strike one, I don't think, as the correct source. First, because at no time does he suggest that he knows or understands at all that the Dashwood women were sorry to leave Sussex or Norland. And that's not really a criticism of Sir John. It seems to me, he just sort of assumes that everybody enjoys the conviviality and is as happy at Barton as he is himself, and enjoys the conviviality and the joviality of Barton as much as he does. There's sort of that reason first. I don't think Sir John can see outside of Barton enough to imagine that the Dashwood women, Elinor in particular, might be very sorry to leave Sussex. But furthermore, second, there is no indication that Sir John has ever even visited Norland in order for him to be able to make a judgment on how prodigiously beautiful a place it actually is. In fact, the text rather pointedly, it seems to me, states that Sir John had formerly visited at Stanhill, but it was too long ago for his young cousins to remember him, and that's from chapter 6. Stanhill is where the Dashwoods lived before they moved to Norland. So if Sir John had ever visited Norland, you think this would be the place where it would be mentioned, but no, the text mentions that he visited them at Stanhill, so where they lived before they moved to Norland. Clearly, Lucy Steele was alarmed by Edward's last visit to her at her uncle's near Plymouth, and furthermore, clearly she knew that Edward was going straight to see Elinor, because she tells Elinor that. So she knows that Edward left her in order to go directly to spend time with Elinor. And also, probably, clearly, Lucy had observed during that visit that Edward was distressed and ill-seeming. So this conversation between Lucy and Elinor refers back to the conversation that I quoted earlier, when Edward comes to visit them in chapter 16. So here Lucy says, "Did you not think him dreadful low-spirited when he was at Barton? He was so miserable when he left us at Longstipple to go to you, that I was afraid you would think him quite ill." Elinor: "Did he come from your uncle's then, when he visited us?" "Oh yes, he had been staying a fortnight with us. Did you think he came directly from town?" "No," replied Elinor, most feelingly sensible of every fresh circumstance in favour of Lucy's veracity. "I remember he told us that he had been staying a fortnight with some friends near Plymouth." She remembered too her own surprise at the time, at his mentioning nothing farther of those friends, at his total silence with respect even to their names. This surprise is not mentioned at the time, of course, as I read out earlier. The reader is not supposed to be too easily alerted to such moments in Jane Austen's writing. So, as I said earlier, the moment is kind of passed over for the first-time reader, and its importance only becomes apparent later to a second-time reader. But the key point that I want to make about this particular quotation is what Lucy says at first. So, "He left us at Longstipple to go to you." If you boil that down, he left us to go to you. So Lucy not only knows about Elinor Dashwood as a kind of abstract figure, that, she's sort of worried about this abstract Elinor Dashwood, she seemingly also knew where Elinor was in order for Edward to go to her. That is, she knew that Elinor lived at Barton because she knew where Edward was going. So not just going to see Elinor, but going to Barton to see Elinor. And with this information, Lucy Steele would seek to make as much as she possibly could, I imagine, of her meeting in Exeter with her distant relation, Mrs. Jennings, whose daughter lives at Barton Park. And kind of no wonder then that Lucy presses so much for a meeting with Elinor. So going back to my first quotation of Sir John's, he says, "They both long to see you." So the Steeles long to see the Dashwoods. And this suggests, I think, rather more intensity of feeling than just wanting to meet them because of their pretty faces, because they have been told that they are two of the most beautiful creatures in the world. To long to meet them suggests something, some more particular reason to want to meet them, it seems to me. What is Elinor's view? Well, in the opening of Volume 2, when Elinor is reflecting on the catastrophe that is Lucy Steele's revelation of her and Edward's engagement, Elinor remembers Edward's visit near Plymouth, his melancholy state of mind, his dissatisfaction at his own prospects, his uncertain behaviour towards herself, the intimate knowledge of the Miss Steeles as to Norland and their family connections, which had often surprised her. From the text here, it seems that Elinor made this connection, that she believes the Steeles' information to have come from Edward. I do not think that the Steele sisters did indeed hear at Exeter that the Dashwood sisters were the most beautiful creatures in the world, or if they did, it was only supplementary to what they had already kind of been told, or what Lucy Steele in particular already feared. I think we might take this generic, cliched, over-the-top piece of flattery that you are the most beautiful creatures in the world, quite a dull piece of flattery too, not very imaginative. I think we might take that as having been planted by Lucy Steele and put into the mouth of Sir John as a deliberate attempt by Lucy to engineer a meeting with Elinor Dashwood. So she's trying to kind of cajole Elinor through flattery. She's trying to get Elinor to want to meet her through this kind of outrageous piece of flattery, which she knows, or I suppose that she will quickly be able to imagine Sir John will pass on to the Dashwood women. In other words, and to answer the main question of this video, yes, I think that Lucy Steele very much knew all about Elinor Dashwood before coming to Barton. And one of Jane Austen's kind of delicious ironies, perhaps painful ironies, I think that she learned all about her and grew suspicious of her from Edward Ferrars himself. And one final point, it might even explain why the Steele sisters were in Exeter at all. So it would not surprise me if Lucy Steele was just waiting for and did everything she could to engineer a meeting in Exeter, which is, after all, only 4 miles from Barton and much, much closer to Barton than Plymouth, where she had been before. So it seems to me that she might have gone to Exeter just in order to wait for and sort of hope that she could engineer a meeting in Exeter with someone, with anyone, at all connected with Barton who might be able to introduce her to Elinor Dashwood. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Remember, if you like what I do here on my channel where I analyse classic literature, then do subscribe. And if you have liked the video, then do please press the thumbs up button. It helps me out in YouTube's algorithm. Thank you to everybody who has supported my channel. Your support really, truly is appreciated. And what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think that Lucy Steele knew all about Elinor Dashwood before she even came to Barton?